I held my breath as the HOA officer's flashlight beam swept across my backyard. My heart pounded so loudly I swore they could hear it. I crouched in the shadows, praying they wouldn't notice the loose dirt near the garden bed. The only clue that something far bigger lay beneath my home. A secret room. My only escape from their relentless control. The beam lingered for a moment, then moved on. I let out a silent breath. They had no idea. But before I tell you how I built a hidden room right under their noses, let me take you back to the beginning. To the moment I realized I had to escape my own house. I used to love my home. A charming little house on a quiet street. Until the HOA turned it into a personal prison. It started small. Your grass is an inch too tall, they'd say. Your front door is an approved color. Petty fines arrived like clockwork, each one for some ridiculous violation. Then it escalated. I came home one day to find a letter taped to my door. Your backyard furniture is in violation of community aesthetics. Remove it within 24 hours or face penalties. I laughed. How could they dictate what I put in MY backyard? But when I ignored the letter, they took action. The next morning, my patio furniture was gone. Just gone. No warning. No knock on the door. The HOA had come into my backyard and removed it. I was furious. But when I confronted them, they shrugged. It's in the bylaws. And that was just the beginning. They installed security cameras on the street, watching every move I made. They sent complaints about my garbage cans not being pulled in fast enough. They even fined me when my porch light wasn't the right wattage. It felt like I was being watched 24/7. No privacy, no peace, no control. Something had to change. That's when the idea hit me. I didn't need to move. I didn't need to fight them. I needed a place they couldn't control. A place they didn't even know existed. A hidden room. It sounded insane at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. A secret space where I could unwind, free from the HOA's prying eyes. A place they could never invade. But where would I build it? The attic was too obvious. The basement was small and had only one entrance. Then it hit me, the backyard. I could build a hidden underground room beneath my garden, completely invisible, completely off their radar. But how? Digging a secret underground room wasn't exactly something I could do overnight. There were risks, tons of risks. If the HOA caught me, they'd fine me into oblivion or worse, find a way to tear it down. But I was determined. I started researching, watching videos on underground bunkers, learning about ventilation, waterproofing, and how to conceal an entrance. And slowly, a plan began to form, pulling it off without the HOA noticing. And that's where things got complicated. I knew that if I wanted to pull this off, I had to be smart, smarter than the HOA. Digging an underground room wasn't just about shoveling dirt. It had to be deep enough to stand in, wide enough to be comfortable, and, most importantly, invisible from the surface. One wrong move, one nosy neighbor, and my entire plan would come crashing down. I waited until midnight. The neighborhood was silent, except for the occasional chirp of crickets. Armed with shovel, I stepped into my backyard and got to work. Every time my shovel hit the ground, I flinched. The dirt felt impossibly heavy, and with each scoop, I expected a flashlight beam to sweep over me, catching me in the act. After an hour, I had barely made a dent. My hands ached, sweat dripped down my face, and the hole looked pathetic, like a dog had started digging and given up halfway. I needed a new approach. The next day, I went to a hardware store and bought a tarp, a couple large storage bins, and a post-hole digger, a tool that let me dig deep, narrow holes quickly. Each night, I dug deeper. I carefully packed the loose dirt into the bins, carrying them inside to scatter it bit by bit around my property. I even mixed some into my neighbors' flower beds when they weren't looking. Slowly but surely, the hole grew deeper. About a week in, I was waist deep in the hole when I heard footsteps. Heavy boots. Coming closer, my stomach clenched. I barely had time to climb out before I spotted a flashlight bouncing through the trees. The HOA patrol. I yanked the tarp over the hole, grabbed a rake, and started smoothing the dirt over like I was just gardening. My heart slammed against my ribs as the officer stopped at my fence. Peering in, Out late, huh? He asked. I forced a chuckle. Yeah, just fixing up my garden. He lingered for a second too long. Then, without another word, he walked away. I waited until he was gone before exhaling. That was too close. I had to be more careful. After weeks of careful digging, the hole was finally deep enough. But I couldn't just leave it as a dirt pit. I had to reinforce it. Using stolen moments during the day, I brought in supplies, plywood for the walls, concrete for floor, and metal supports to keep everything from caving in. Installing the ceiling was the hardest part. It had to be sturdy enough to walk on, but light enough for me to open from the inside. I built a wooden frame, laid down thick plywood, and covered it with soil and grass to blend perfectly with the garden. To anyone else, it was just a normal backyard. But beneath the surface, my escape was almost complete. I had built the room. I had concealed it perfectly. But I forgot one crucial thing, getting in and out undetected. And that's when disaster struck. The underground room was nearly finished, but there was one huge problem. I had no proper way to enter without leaving a trace. Right now, my entrance was just a tarp-covered hole, and that wasn't going to cut it. If the HOA ever saw disturbed soil or a suspicious-looking trapdoor, they'd be all over it. I needed something foolproof. And then it hit me. The garden bed. I had a small raised flower bed near the back fence, the perfect place to hide an entrance. If I built the hatch underneath it, the weight of the soil and plants would act as camouflage. It was risky. One mistake, and the HOA would catch on. But at this point, I was all in. First, I measured out the opening, just big enough for me to climb in and out. I built a wooden frame to fit inside, reinforcing it with metal hinges and a locking mechanism. Then, I attached a thin layer of soil and grass on top, making sure it looked natural when closed. The real challenge was how to open it without being obvious. I decided on a pressure system. Instead of visible handle, I rigged a small hydraulic lift hidden beneath a fake plant pot. When I twisted it just right, the hatch would rise just enough for me to grab and open. It was genius. I waited until nightfall to test it. I twisted the plant pot, just like I designed it to, and it worked. The hatch lifted smoothly, revealing the hidden passage below. I climbed inside, pulled it shut, and for the first time, I was completely invisible. No HOA spies, no prying eyes, just me and my secret hideaway. I flipped on a battery-powered light and looked around. The underground room was small, but perfect. Enough space for a chair, a desk, and even a mini fridge. I had done it. I had escaped the HOA. Or so I thought. The next morning, as I stepped onto my back porch, I froze. The HOA patrol was standing right next to my hidden entrance, and they were staring at my garden bed. If you are enjoying this story, like and comment where you are watching from. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. Why were they looking at my garden? The HOA officer, a middle-aged man with a clipboard, stood just feet away from my hidden hatch. Another officer, a short woman with sharp eyes, knelt down, inspecting the soil. I clenched my fists. Had they noticed something? I took a slow breath and walked toward them, keeping my face neutral. Act normal. Act normal. Morning, I said, pretending I wasn't internally screaming. Something wrong. The woman stood up, brushing dirt off her hands. Your garden bed looks different. My stomach dropped. Oh, I forced a casual laugh. Yeah, I just replanted a few things. Figured I'd freshen up. She squinted at me. Strange. Someone reported unusual activity in your backyard. My blood ran cold. A neighbor must have seen me. Unusual activity? I chuckled again, but my voice wavered. I was just gardening last night. The man flipped through his clipboard. Your property has had multiple violations in the past. We just want to make sure everything is compliant. Compliant? They were looking for a reason to find me. Maybe even dig up my yard. I needed to distract them. I stepped closer and let out an exaggerated sigh. You know what? I think I know what this is about, I said, lowering my voice as if I were embarrassed. The officers leaned in. I glanced around and whispered, I saw a stray dog digging here last night. Must have messed up the soil. Probably why it looks different. The woman raised an eyebrow. A stray dog. I nodded. Yeah, looked like a big one too. Dug all over my yard before it ran off. Maybe that's what the neighbors saw. They exchanged glances. The man exhaled. Well, if that's all it was, I nodded eagerly. Yup, just a dog. Nothing weird going on. The woman still looked skeptical. We'll be watching just in case. I forced a grin. Of course. Appreciate your hard work. They finally turned and walked away, but the woman stole one last glance at my garden bed before disappearing down the street. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. That was too close. That night, I sat inside my hidden room, heart still pounding from the close call. I had built the perfect escape, but now the HOA was suspicious. If they ever caught me disappearing into ground, they'd dig up my entire yard. I needed to be more careful. I needed to outsmart them. And that's when I made a dangerous decision. I wouldn't just hide from the HOA. I'd start fighting back. The HOA had their eyes on me, but I wasn't about to let them win. They wanted to make my life miserable? Fine. But now, I was going to make their job a whole lot harder. I sat inside my hidden room, staring at the dim glow of my battery-powered light. My sanctuary was nearly perfect, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still vulnerable. If they got too suspicious, they might dig up my yard. I needed to do two things. One, throw them off my trail. Two, turn their own rules against them. If the HOA was watching my garden bed, I had to give them something else to focus on. Something that would make them forget about my backyard completely. So, I created a fake violation. That night, I snuck over my own front yard and deliberately broke one of their dumbest rules. I painted my mailbox the wrong color, bright neon blue, an eyesore, an obvious violation, something they couldn't ignore. And sure enough, the very next morning, a warning letter was taped to my front door. Non-compliant mailbox color. Must be corrected within 48 hours or face fines. Perfect. Now, their attention was on my front yard instead of my backyard. But I wasn't done yet. I spent the afternoon digging through the HOA's 200-page rulebook. If they were going to harass me with ridiculous fines, I was going to find a way to hit back. And then I found it, a small, overlooked clause about community decor. According to their own rules, holiday decorations were permitted year-round if they were tasteful and maintained. I smirked. Oh, this was going to be fun. That night, I went all out. Christmas lights, inflatable reindeer, plastic pumpkins, and even a giant fake turkey. I decorated my front yard like it was every holiday at once, because technically it was still tasteful and maintained. The next morning, when the HOA patrol arrived, they looked absolutely horrified. The same officer from before, the woman with sharp eyes, stomped up to my door. "What is this?" she demanded. I smiled innocently. "Holiday decorations." She pointed at the rule book in her hands. "This is not compliant." I crossed my arms. "Actually, it is." I watched as she flipped through the pages, reading the clause over and over again. She knew I was right, but she couldn't do anything about it. Her jaw clenched. She was furious. I had just beaten them at their own game. But then, a new threat emerged. Just as I thought I was in the clear, I noticed something strange later that evening. A security camera. The HOA had installed a brand new camera on the street, and it was pointed directly at my backyard. My stomach dropped. They were watching me, and if I wasn't careful, they'd discover my hidden room. I had to act fast. The HOA had escalated. A brand new security camera now loomed over my street, pointed directly at my backyard. I stood at my window, heart pounding, as I stared at the blinking red light on the camera. They weren't just suspicious anymore. They were watching me. I clenched my fists. This was war. The moment I saw that camera, I knew I had to act fast. My hidden entrance was no longer safe. If they saw me disappear in the ground, my whole plan would fall apart. I grabbed my tools and rushed outside under the cover of darkness. I had one night to move my entrance before the camera captured anything suspicious. I worked fast, dismantling the garden bed hatch, sealing the opening with extra soil, and erasing every trace of my underground room. But if I closed off the old entrance, I needed a new one, a better one, and that's when I got a crazy idea. If the backyard was compromised, the only logical place left was inside my house. The idea was risky. It meant cutting into foundation, rerouting electrical wires, and making sure nobody, not even an HOA spy, would suspect a thing. But I didn't have a choice. The best spot? My closet. I cleared out the back wall and started carefully cutting into it, revealing the cold concrete behind. With a diamond saw, I slowly carved out an entryway just big enough to slip through. Once I made it through the wall, I dug downward, reconnecting to my underground room. 2 days later, the new entrance was complete. To the HOA, it was just a normal closet, but behind the clothing racks, a hidden tunnel led straight to my escape. Late that night, I slipped into my closet and pushed through the secret panel. The passage was narrow, barely enough for me to crawl through, but it worked. I climbed down, dusted myself off, and flipped on the lights. I had done it. Now, I could enter my hidden room without ever stepping foot in the backyard. The HOA could watch my garden all they wanted. They'd never find me, or so I thought, because the very next morning, I woke up to something terrifying. A notice taped to my door. Mandatory home inspection. Your property has been flagged for non-compliance. A board member will be conducting a walkthrough inspection this weekend. My blood ran cold. The HOA was coming inside my house. And if they found the entrance in my closet, everything would be over. The HOA was coming inside my house. I stared at the notice in my shaking hands. A home inspection? Since when did they have the right to do that? I scanned the letter again. At the bottom, in fine print, I saw the justification. Per HOA Policy Section 12B, all homes are subject to random inspections for compliance with community standards. I clenched my jaw. Random? No, this was targeted. They were on to me, and if they stepped inside my closet, they'd find my secret entrance. I had 2 days before the inspection. That meant I had 48 hours to make sure they found absolutely nothing. I needed to seal off the entrance of my closet, but not permanently. If I sealed it with drywall, I'd lose access to my underground hideout. If I left it as it was, they'd definitely notice something was off. I needed something that looked real, but could still be open when I needed it. And then it hit me, a fake wall panel. I rushed to the hardware store and bought a sheet of thin, flexible drywall. It was lightweight and easy to cut, perfect for creating a temporary cover. I painted it to match the inside of my closet, mounted it on hidden hinges, and secured it with magnetic locks. To anyone looking inside, it would just be a normal closet wall, but with a small push in the right spot, the panel would pop open, revealing my hidden tunnel. It was genius. Saturday morning arrived, and right on time, 3 HOA board members knocked on my door. I forced a polite smile as I let them in. There was Gary, the HOA president, a grumpy old man who always looked like he was smelling something bad. Beside him was Karen. Of course her name was Karen, the same sharp-eyed woman who had been snooping around my backyard. And then there was Jim, a quiet, younger guy who mostly just nodded along. Gary cleared his throat. We've received reports of non-compliant activity on your property. This is a routine check to ensure everything is up to standard. I gritted my teeth. Routine, my ass. But I nodded. Of course. Feel free to look around. They moved through my house slowly, inspecting every corner like detectives searching for a crime scene. Karen ran her fingers along my countertops, as if checking for dust. Jim took notes. Gary peered suspiciously into every room. Then they reached my bedroom. My stomach twisted as Karen's eyes locked onto my closet. "We'll check in here," she said, reaching for the door. I held my breath. She stepped inside and scanned the walls. She was inches away from my hidden entrance. I watched as her hand moved toward it, the exact spot where my fake panel was installed. If she pushed it, if she even tapped it, it would be over. My heart pounded. I had to act fast. I forced out a loud, dramatic gasp. Karen spun around. "What?" I pointed behind her, eyes wide. "Oh my God, that spider is huge." She shrieked and jumped back, nearly knocking over Jim. "Where?" she yelped, frantically swiping at herself. I think it ran under the bed," I stammered, trying not to laugh. It was massive. Jim and Gary looked unimpressed, but Karen was already backing out of the closet. Nope, I'm done. I hate spiders," she muttered, practically sprinting toward the door. I bit my lip to keep from smiling. Crisis averted. The rest of the inspection went quickly, with Karen refusing to go back into my room. They rushed through the rest of the house, barely looking at anything else. After a final round of muttering between themselves, Gary finally spoke. "Well, everything looks fine," he admitted, clearly disappointed. I crossed my arms. "Told you." Karen still looked rattled. "We'll be keeping an eye on your property," she snapped. "Don't think you're off the hook." With that, they left defeated. I waited until their car was out of sight before I let out the biggest sigh of relief of my life. They had been right there, inches away from my secret entrance, and they still hadn't found it. I had won this round, but something told me the HOA wasn't done with me yet. I had won the inspection battle, but the war was far from over, because less than 24 hours later, the HOA hit me with something worse than a fine or a warning letter. They sent a private investigator. It started the next morning. I was drinking coffee by the window when I noticed it. A black SUV parked down the street. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe a neighbor had visitors. Maybe someone's car broke down. But then an hour passed. Then two, and the SUV never moved. The tinted windows made it impossible to see inside, but I could feel it. Someone was watching my house. And when I stepped outside to get the mail, the engine started. The SUV didn't leave. It just repositioned slightly, as if getting a better angle. A chill ran down my spine. The HOA wasn't just suspicious anymore. They were investigating me. I couldn't let them catch me slipping. So I acted normal. Completely, totally normal. I watered my front lawn, waved at passing neighbors, and even made a point to repaint my mailbox back to the approved color. I wanted the investigator to think they had been wrong about me, that I was just a boring, compliant homeowner. But I needed more than just an act. I needed to know who they were. So that night, I did something risky. I grabbed my hoodie, pulled it over my head, and snuck out the back. I took the long way around the block, circling back toward the SUV from behind. Moving carefully, I crept up to the passenger side, hoping to get a glimpse of whoever was inside. But just as I got close, the SUV roared to life. The tires screeched as it sped off down the street, disappearing into the night. I stood there, heart pounding. They knew, whoever they were, they knew I was on to them, and that meant I was running out of time. The next morning, just as I was debating my next move, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find a single envelope taped to the wood. Inside was a formal HOA letter, and when I read it, my blood ran cold. Notice of HOA violation hearing. Due to repeated non-compliance, the HOA board has scheduled a hearing to discuss the possibility of foreclosure on your home. Failure to attend will result in further action. I gripped the letter so tightly my knuckles turned white. Foreclosure? They weren't just trying to find me. They weren't just trying to harass me. They wanted to take my house. And if I didn't do something fast, they might actually win. I sat at my kitchen table, gripping the letter. Foreclosure. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was an all-out attack. I had spent years making this house my home. I wasn't going to let them take it from me. But how was I supposed to fight back? I sat at my kitchen table, gripping the letter. Foreclosure. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was an all-out attack. I had spent years making this house my home. I wasn't going to let them take it from me. But how was I supposed to fight back? The hearing was set for Friday at 6 p.m. I arrived at the clubhouse and stepped inside, met with a long conference table where the entire HOA board sat waiting. At the head of the table was Gary, the HOA president. Beside him, Karen sat with her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a smug little smirk. The moment I sat down, Gary cleared his throat. We've received multiple reports of non-compliance. You violated our landscaping policies, evaded inspection, and... I cut him off. Cut to the chase, Gary. You're threatening foreclosure. But per HOA bylaws, you can't legally do that unless I'm 6 months behind on dues. And as you well know, I'm paid up. A beat of silence. Jim, the quieter board member, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Even he seemed surprised by my argument. Gary coughed. Well, did you think I wouldn't read the rules? I leaned forward, because it sure looks like you were hoping I wouldn't. Karen's smug expression faltered. Jim checked his notes, then glanced at Gary. Technically, he's right. Gary's jaw tensed. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. The HOA couldn't foreclose on my house, but I knew they weren't going to give up that easily. As I walked out of the meeting, Karen shot me a glare. You might have won this round, she hissed, but we'll be watching. And trust me, we'll find something. I smirked. Good luck with that. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I had stopped them from taking my home. But how long before they found my secret? I had exposed their bluff. The HOA couldn't legally foreclose on my house, but they weren't giving up. If they couldn't take my home through paperwork, they'd find another way. And the very next morning, they made their next move. I was sipping coffee when I heard a loud thunk outside my door. I opened it to find another letter, stapled to a bright red notice. I ripped it open. Final notice. You are in violation of HOA codes 3A, 7B, and 14D. You have 24 hours to comply, or further legal action will be taken. I scanned the violations. Unauthorized construction, unapproved modifications to property, failure to allow full HOA inspections. I gritted my teeth. They were coming after my secret room. I had one day to erase any trace of my hidden escape. I rushed into my closet and yanked open the secret entrance. The tunnel still looked untouched, but the HOA was looking harder now. If they got another inspection, they'd find it for sure. I needed to make my modifications look normal, so I started working. I swapped out the secret panel for a plain, uncut drywall sheet, permanently sealing off the entrance for now. I covered up any signs of recent construction with fresh paint and strategically placed furniture. I even adjusted my landscaping outside just to throw them off. By the time I was done, my house looked perfectly ordinary, but I knew this wasn't enough. The HOA was determined. I needed to take things one step further. If the HOA was watching me, I needed to watch them back. That night, I set up hidden security cameras around my property. I positioned them in places where they wouldn't be easily spotted, behind bushes, near the roof, even inside a fake birdhouse. If the HOA tried anything sneaky, I'd catch them in the act. And sure enough, at 2 a.m., my cameras picked up movement. I checked the live feed on my phone, and what I saw made my blood boil. Turin, standing in my yard, holding a flashlight, and taking pictures of my house. I watched in silence as Karen crept through my yard, snapping photos. Her flashlight beam traced along my fence, my windows, even my closet wall, where my hidden room used to be. She was searching for proof. She knew something was off, but she had no idea I was watching her. I could have called the cops. I could have stayed hidden, but I was done playing defense. I grabbed my phone, flipped on my porch light, and yanked open my front door. Karen spun around like a deer caught in headlights. Karen, I said, crossing my arms, enjoying your midnight stroll. She fumbled with her phone. I was just checking for violations. At 2 a.m., I raised an eyebrow. That's trespassing, Karen. Her face turned red. I have you on camera. I interrupted, holding up my phone. The live security feed showed her standing there, guilty as sin, her mouth open and closed like a fish. Then she turned and ran. I watched her scramble back toward her car, her flashlight bouncing wildly. She barely managed to slam the door before peeling out of my driveway. I smirked. I had her. The next morning, I sent an email to the entire neighborhood. I attached the video footage of Karen snooping around my property at 2 a.m. Subject line, HOA trespassing? Within minutes, my inbox exploded. Wait, aren't they always complaining about us breaking the rules? This is next level creepy. Can they even legally do this? The neighborhood turned on the HOA overnight, and by afternoon, I got another letter in the mail. Karen has voluntarily stepped down from the HOA board. I laughed out loud. One down. But something told me the HOA wasn't finished with me yet. Karen was gone, but I knew the HOA wasn't done with me. And the very next morning, they proved me right, because when I walked outside, I found something that made my stomach drop. A city inspector, standing in my driveway. The man adjusted his clipboard and gave me a tight smile. Morning, sir. I'm here to conduct an official property inspection. I frowned. What? Why? He flipped through his notes. We receive a report about unpermitted construction on your property. My blood went cold. The HOA couldn't get me with their rules, so now they were using the city against me. I forced a casual shrug. I'm not aware of any unpermitted work. Well, I still have to check, he said. You mind showing me around? I nodded, keeping my face neutral. But inside, I was panicking. I led him around the property, sticking to my story. Everything he asked about, I played dumb. Have you made any recent modifications? Oh, nope, just regular maintenance. Any additions to the structure? Oh, nope, everything's original. Mind if I check the inside? Oh, sure, but I don't think you'll find anything. Every word was calculated. I had to stay cool, and for a while, it seemed to be working, until he stepped inside, and his eyes locked onto the wall where my hidden room used to be. He ran his hand along the wall, frowning. This paint looks fresh. I kept my face blank. Yeah, just repainted last week. He knocked on the drywall, listening. Sounds hollow. My heart pounded. If he pushed just a little harder, if he investigated just a little deeper, he'd find the entrance. But then his phone rang. He sighed, checked the caller ID, and stepped outside to answer. I exhaled slowly. That was too close. A minute later, he came back in. Well, everything seems fine, he said, scribbling on his clipboard. I'll file the report, but I don't see any major violations. I nodded, fighting the urge to collapse in relief. As soon as he left, I sealed the entrance for good, because if the HOA was willing to call the city on me, they were getting desperate. I had barely survived the city inspection, but if the HOA was getting desperate, that meant they weren't done. I didn't have to wait long to find out what was next, because the very next morning, I woke up to a tow truck in my driveway, and they were hooking up my car. I stormed outside, still in my pajama pants. Hey, what the hell are you doing? The tow truck driver barely glanced at me. HOA order, sir. Your vehicle is in violation. Violation? I turned to see Gary, the HOA president, standing smugly nearby, clipboard in hand. You didn't move your car for street sweeping, he said. That's a violation of Section 8C. Your car is being impounded. I actually laughed, because I knew for a fact that was a lie. There was no street sweeping this week. I shot back. I checked the city schedule. Gary's smug expression faltered. Well, the HOA has the right to enforce parking rules. On public streets? I countered, because this is an HOA-owned property. You don't control city roads. The tow truck driver hesitated. He knew this was shady, and that's when I dropped the hammer. I have a security camera pointed right at my driveway. I said, so I've got this all on video. The illegal tow, your lies, everything. Gary's face turned red. I turned to the tow truck driver. You really want to be part of this? Because I'll be sending the footage to the city and my lawyer. That did it. The driver unhooked my car and left without another word. Gary, meanwhile, was fuming. This isn't over, he spat before storming off. But I had won again. And now, I had proof the HOA was breaking laws. I just needed to use it against them. I had exposed Karen. I had caught Gary in an illegal towing scam. And now, the HOA was on the ropes. But instead of backing off, they did something even more reckless. because when I checked my mail that afternoon, I found a lawsuit. The HOA was suing me. I tore open the envelope and scanned the legal document. The claims were ridiculous. Repeated refusal to comply with HOA inspections, unapproved modifications to the property, public defamation of the HOA. Defamation? They were suing me for exposing the truth? I clenched my jaw. This wasn't about violations anymore. This was personal. I wasn't going down without a fight. I spent the next few hours gathering everything I had against them. The video of Karen trespassing, the illegal tow attempt, the city inspector's clean report, and then I made a phone call to a lawyer because if the HOA wanted to fight dirty, I was bringing the hammer down. The next morning, I walked into the HOA's legal office. Gary was already there, waiting with a smug grin. Finally decided to surrender, he sneered. I set a thick folder on the table. Actually, I said, I'm countersuing. His grin disappeared. I slid the folder across the table. Illegal trespassing, harassment, fraudulent towing attempts. Oh, and defamation? Because you've been spreading false claims about me to my neighbors. Gary's hands tightened into fists. You have no case, he snapped. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Karen's face lit up the screen. Creeping through my yard at 2 a.m. Gary's eyes widened. I smirked. You were saying? By the time I left that office, Gary was pale. He knew he had lost. And later that night, a new HOA letter arrived. Due to recent legal complications, the HOA board is undergoing a full review. Translation? They were falling apart. But I wasn't celebrating yet, because something told me the HOA had one last desperate move left. By the time I left that office, Gary was pale. He knew he had lost. And later that night, a new HOA letter arrived. Due to recent legal complications, the HOA board is undergoing a full review. Translation? They were falling apart. But I wasn't celebrating yet, because something told me the HOA had one last desperate move left. The HOA was collapsing. Karen had been exposed. Gary was cornered. And now, the entire board was under review. But instead of surrendering, they went nuclear. Because the very next day, I came home to an eviction notice taped to my front door. Immediate removal. Violation of HOA regulations. They were trying to kick me out of my own house. I didn't even bother calling the HOA. I went straight to my lawyer. This is illegal, right? I asked, slamming the paper on his desk. He chuckled. Completely, they can't evict a homeowner. They're bluffing. But I wasn't taking chances. So, I filed an emergency restraining order against the HOA. They couldn't find me. They couldn't harass me. And they sure as hell couldn't evict me. The paperwork was official within 48 hours. And when I walked into the next HOA meeting, I brought a sheriff with me. The second Gary saw the officer, he turned white. This isn't necessary, he stammered. Oh, it is, the officer said, holding up the order. Any further harassment, and you'll be facing legal action. The board members looked at each other, panicking. And that's when it happened. Half of them resigned on the spot. Karen had already stepped down. Now, the rest were jumping ship. The HOA had officially lost. With the HOA in shambles, the neighborhood turned against them. People started pushing for a complete dissolution of the association. And within weeks, the vote went through. The HOA was gone. No more fines. No more Karen. No more ridiculous rules. And me? I finally had peace. I stepped into my hidden room one last time, just to reflect. It had started as an escape, a way to get away from the HOA's iron grip. But now, I didn't need to hide anymore, because I had won.